To answer the thumbnail's question, it's not a 100 times boost, but before I cover why, I'd like to warn that there will be manga spoilers throughout the video, so if you aren't cool with spoilers, watch this video when you and/or the anime catches up. Going back to the 100 times multiplier, you may be wondering where I got this from. Well, it's based on a statement Tanjiro makes during his second attempt at beheading Upper Moon 6 Gyutaro's head. To quote him, he states, "A single blow won't be enough. Summon 100 times that strength." The problem with this is that you'd have to be fine with a plethora of very extreme notions for this to be consistent. Let's go over a few examples. If the mark was a 100 times amp, then Zohakuten would have been using less than 0.01% of his strength when against base Tanjiro because base Mitsuri is stronger than marked Tanjiro and marked Mitsuri is relative to Zohakuten. In the Akaza fight, marked Tanjiro, who's at best base Giyu level, could perceive marked Giyu fighting Akaza, so does that mean Tanjiro's perception speed even before obtaining the see-through world is 100 times his movement speed? I think you get the point by now. If you want to know why Tanjiro said 100 times if he didn't actually get that much stronger, he's just hyping himself up to push his body to the absolute limit. It's like when coaches tell players to give 200% effort or something, when that obviously isn't possible. If it isn't 100 times, is there any way to even remotely gauge the stat buff provided by the mark? Maybe, but the presented method uses real-world statistics and takes a few liberties, and as Demon Slayer doesn't always follow real-life givens, like how the speed of sound is relative to the speed of lightning and the speed needed to burn off clothing is much higher than Mach 2, this may be very inaccurate. To start off, it helps to know the minimum speed gap needed to blitz an opponent within relatively short distances. As the definition of a blitz can vary between one person to another, we'll use a definition that's easy for me to work with, which is to engage the opponent faster than said opponent can perceive. This would mean the minimum speed gap to blitz is around 4.45 times, as the speed of an average human is at best around 7.7 meters per second, while the minimum speed to move faster than the eye is around 34.3 meters per second. Next, we'll have to find an instance of two characters relative to each other and see their speed dynamic when one of them receives a mark-esque amp, and fortunately for us, I've already mentioned this instance, being Tanjiro perceiving marked Giyu and Akaza's battle. I said that Tanjiro was at best base Giyu level, so for him to be able to perceive what's going on and even have the balls to jump in, the mark's multiplier should be lower than the approximately 4.45 times blitz requisite, especially considering Akaza, who was equal to marked Giyu in speed, bothered to catch Tanjiro's blade, which would have been unneeded if he could blitz him. Even though marked Giyu and Akaza aren't quite a blitz tier above Tanjiro, the latter displays that he's still on a different level in terms of speed, as seen when Tanjiro before briefly awakening the see-through world barely moved in response to Akaza's incoming attack. Considering this, we could get a rough multiplier by rounding down the 4.45 times blitz requisite to just 4 times, which is close to blitzing, but not quite there. There's not really any evidence for or against the mark stat boost being the same across the board, besides maybe marked Tanjiro's cutting speed being seemingly much more than 4 times faster than before, therefore potentially supporting that the strength amp, and by possible extension, durability because of Newton's third law, is higher than the speed amp. But you could argue that Tanjiro's determination to push his body to the absolute limit also took the form of a resolve amp which stacked on top of his mark, which could explain the exponentially faster cutting speed. If you're wondering what a resolve amp is, it's sometimes called a mental amp, and is an anime trope in which an individual displays feats they're normally incapable of doing in desperate situations through sheer determination. It's based on an actual concept called hysterical strength, which may or may not be grounded in reality. In Demon Slayer, the two most prominent examples of a resolve amp is Kyojuro keeping Akaza in place, and Shinobu becoming unpredictable to Doma. That's all I got regarding the mark stat boost, but there's still another amp I want to try to quantify, being the see-through world, which heavily increases reaction, precognition, and perception speed, and likely combat and attack speed as well to a lesser degree. The way I'll go about this is to measure the speed jump Muichiro got upon attaining the see-through world for reaction speed, and look at awakened Kokushibo's attacks for combat and attack speed. To start, marked Muichiro got blitzed by a single swing from a suppressed base Kokushibo, while base Sanemi not only kept up with multiple swings from him, he also fended off the blood art emitting from his slashes, making Muichiro more than a blitz tier slower than base Sanemi. When he attains the see-through world, he keeps up with marked Sanemi, despite having arguably worse injuries, possibly rivaling peak Sanemi's reaction speed if he wasn't injured. If that's the case, the see-through world's reaction speed amp is the mark's multiplier, being 4 times a number over 4.45. I'll take a guess and round the latter number up to 4.5. 4 times 4.5 equals 18, making that the potential reaction speed multiplier for the see-through world. Moving on to combat and attack speed, it likely has a lower multiplier than reaction speed because awakened Kokushibo failed to completely blitz Gyomei and Sanemi despite using the see-through world and being already around the level of their marked states in base form. Although Kokushibo attacked at a range, which would give them more time to react compared to close-quarters combat, Gyomei states that Kokushibo's range has only increased by over 2 times, so even if we round over 2 times to 3 times, Kokushibo's ranged attacks would still reach Gyomei and Sanemi at the same time as a close-up attack at least 6 times faster than base Kokushibo, which is still higher than the minimum blitz requisite of around 4.45 times. The problem with scaling Kokushibo's ranged attacks to his base attacks is that neither marked Gyomei or Sanemi are explicitly equal to his base form. Sure, they're in the same tier as base Kokushibo, but that isn't the same as equal, so let's quantify a highball. Similar to Akaza and marked Tanjiro, Kokushibo's ranged attacks are much faster than marked Sanemi, but they don't quite blitz him, so if we reuse Akaza and Tanjiro's 4 times speed gap for ranged Kokushibo and marked Sanemi, and highball the latter to be equal to base Kokushibo, we can multiply the 4 times speed gap by the amount of times Kokushibo's range increased, which Gyomei states to be over 2 times. As he doesn't say almost 3 times, it's likely that over 2 times rounds down to 2, so if we use 2.5 times, which is the lowest number that doesn't round down to 2, and multiply it by 4, we get a final highball of Kokushibo's ranged attacks being at most 10 times his base speed. The combat speed amp should be the same as the attack speed amp, unless you think Kokushibo's ranged attacks get slightly slower as they travel due to drag, or fluid resistance, which doesn't have to be the case due to Demon Slayer not always following real-life givens as aforementioned. As for precognition and perception speed, there's virtually no way to even remotely gauge their multipliers, although perception speed likely is the highest speed stat increased, as Tanjiro perceived final form Akaza in slow motion, yet he still received some damage to his head. For those who skip to the end, here are the final numbers. The Slayer mark possibly amps at least speed by around 4 times, with strength and maybe durability being that or higher. The see-through world possibly amps reaction speed by around 18 times, combat and attack speed by at most 10 times, and perception speed by over 18 times, with precognition speed being unknown, possibly in the less than 10 to over 18 times range. That's all for this video. If you have any feedback, questions, disagreements, corrections, or any other appropriate comments, feel free to comment below. Thanks for watching this video and have an awesome day.